Hello and welcome to a Firstpost POV. There's a lot of shock and grief in the United States right now over what happened on Wednesday. Two soldiers from the National Guard were shot, that too just blocks away from the White House. The shooter has been identified as an Afghan national, 29 years old, and he came to the United States way back in 2021. In response to what happened on Wednesday, Donald Trump has decided to impose a ban on immigrants from so-called third world countries. He said there would be a permanent pause on immigration processes from those countries. He's also permanently, for now, banned immigration from Afghanistan. The question is, does he have the power to do what he claims he will do? And what does this mean for the wider immigration crackdown that Donald Trump has unleashed since coming to office? Let me put these questions to my guest, Professor David A. Super, who's a professor at the Georgetown University and is also an expert on American constitutional law. Thank you so much, Professor, for speaking to us on Firstpost.
Thank you for having me.
If I could ask you first up, what exactly does a permanent pause mean? Because we've always understood a pause to be temporary and permanent to be the opposite of that. So what exactly does the president mean when he say there will be a permanent pause on immigration from third world countries?
Well, he's trying to have it both ways. He's trying to play both sides of the law and the politics on this. His constituents, many of his constituents, are very hostile to immigration, and he rode to office both times on anti-immigrant sentiment, so he's trying to play to that. At the same time, he really doesn't have the power to do what he's saying. And I think he understands that, so he calls it a temporary pause. Doing what he's saying would require legislation from Congress that I don't think he has any chance of passing.
Now, in the case of the tariffs too, we had seen these arguments that he does not have the power to do it, but nonetheless, he used something called the IEEPA, which is the International Emergency Economic Powers, to impose them. Are there certain emergency powers in the Constitution that, or perhaps an emergency law in the Constitution that President Trump could use to say that I am now banning immigration from these countries?
There are some emergency powers that presidents have claimed that usually have not been fully tested in the courts. He certainly could try that, but that would only be temporary. That would be for some perceived emergency. He has tried to declare pretty much everything an emergency, and he is increasingly getting pushback from the courts. Many believe that he will lose in the Supreme Court on his tariff case under the law that you mentioned, that it does not give him that power. He could use that law or some other one to claim he has the power to impose this ban on immigration from many countries, but there's no reason to think that the courts will allow him to do that.
Right. So if tomorrow President Trump were to issue an executive order saying the same, despite all the confusion and pushback over the legality of such an order, what do US federal agencies do? What do the border officials and the officials at the airport do when visa applications or immigration applications come? Do they, for the moment, listen to what the president is saying, or do they wait for some legal clarity before moving on?
The president has fired any officials who don't do exactly what he says right away, even if there are serious legal doubts about it. So I would expect that the agencies initially will do as he is told, as he tells them. But I also expect he would be sued very, very quickly. I would be shocked if he isn't sued on Monday about this. And I think it's very likely a court would issue an order against it.
How long would that process take? And I ask because this is something that is putting a lot of people in a state of uncertainty, because it's not just about immigration. He's also challenged some green card holders. How long does this process usually take to go through the American court system and for a verdict to come out of it?
My guess is that we would have an answer within a month. I think that this is so extraordinarily illegal that he would be enjoined in the first court almost immediately within 3 or 4 or 5 days. And then it might take a week or so for his appeal and request for a stay, a freeze on the injunction against him to get considered in a circuit court, an appellate court. And assuming he didn't prevail there, he would then go to the Supreme Court, which would hear it on an emergency basis, would probably freeze the lower court order for a couple weeks while they read the papers, but I have trouble believing the Supreme Court would honor so-called permanent pause. If he had something more specific that he wanted to do and more short term, that would be a harder question. But I think the same Supreme Court that is not going to accept his sweeping, capricious tariffs is not going to accept this sort of thing.
Do you think the fact that this is related to national security, that 2 soldiers were shot, one of them was killed, and that is the trigger for what President Donald Trump is doing, do you think that fact would perhaps sway the Supreme Court or even the Congress when it comes to its decision, or would they stick to the legality of it?
Everybody is appalled by what happened, but this is using a nuclear weapon to kill a mosquito. It's completely out of proportion. We have well over 300 million people in this country. A small handful of them are dangerous and deranged. Proportionately, the mass majority of them are native-born Americans. A few may be immigrants. There's no indication that immigration is the problem here. And this individual was heavily screened under procedures that the administration demanded. And indeed, President Trump himself said that this person just snapped, just went crazy. Shutting down immigration is not going to solve this problem. Most crimes in this country are committed by people who were born here, and that will continue to be the case.
Right. Now, President Trump has targeted this particular policy towards so-called third world countries. Now, the term itself is derogatory and problematic. It's been debated by a lot of people. In our part of the world, we don't like that usage. But nonetheless, President Trump has gone ahead and said it. Is there anything in American law that sets aside what these countries are? And if not, does it not mean that the president and the US government, by extension, is effectively discriminating against people based on their nationality or their ethnicity or where they're from?
Oh, there's no question that he is discriminating. That's the whole point of this, and that's how he's trying to rally his base. President Trump's in a lot of political trouble right now because he promised again and again to release files relating to Jeffrey Epstein, a close friend of his who was exposed as a serial pedophile. And he's doing just about anything he can to distract from that and to get his base supporting him, because many of his supporters believed he was going to fight against pedophiles, and now all of a sudden he seems to be covering for them. So I see this in that light. If the Epstein files come out, I don't think this is going to be something that he will hold on to for very long. And yes, you're quite right to find this term offensive. There is no such list of what are third world countries. And obviously he knows it, and his lawyers know that. But your broader question, yes, this is discrimination on the basis of nationality. And embarrassingly, U.S. immigration law has been that way for a long time.
Right. Now, that's the issue of immigration. The other one is of the green card, which is a lot of people who already live in the United States based on permits that they have. President Trump has said that he would like to re-examine some of those green card holders, specifically from 19 countries, including the likes of Venezuela and Afghanistan. I'm wondering what sort of legal protection do those people have to ensure that this so-called re-examination does not lead to them losing the right to live in America, or worse, getting deported from there?
There are substantial protections on the books. To date, this administration has been ignoring, and sadly, they have made a steady practice of arresting people who come for proper immigration interviews when their status is completely legal. There's great pressure on officials in this administration to increase the number of people that they are arresting and deporting through any means necessary. And unfortunately, green card holders have been vulnerable.
Now, in terms of the powers that President Trump does have from the Constitution, how far can he go before the courts step in? What's the actual red line in US law that the president can actually exercise when it comes to immigration, sending people out of the country, or restricting entry into his country? Is there something that is permissible by law and that he does not need to approach the Congress for?
He has significant powers to control how many refugees are admitted, how many people are admitted from countries where they face persecution. And he has exercised that power to all but eliminate the admission of refugees at the moment. Pretty much the only refugees he's allowing into the country are white South Africans. And he has controls the bureaucracy that is making adjudications. They've been firing immigration judges who were more sympathetic to immigrants, or at least more balanced, and now we're calling them deportation judges. So his control of the federal bureaucracy is fairly sweeping. But changing immigration law, other than the refugee quota, is something that has to go through Congress.
Right. Now, even in his first term, such sweeping orders were controversial. I think back to the Muslim ban, the so-called Muslim ban that was imposed by President Trump that banned people from certain Muslim countries from entering the United States. If I remember correctly, that was also challenged in the court. Can you tell us what that case and the precedent of that case and the legal challenge could mean when this particular order is challenged in court?
Well, it's important to note that the original so-called Muslim ban was one that the administration's own lawyers wouldn't defend in court. So they issued a second and a third version of that. And eventually they came up with one that was watered down enough that the Supreme Court, in a divided decision, upheld it as within the president's powers to protect national security. I think that what he's saying right now is not defensible in court. He may very well do with this, as he did with the Muslim ban, water it down considerably, moderate it considerably, and then go with that. The Supreme Court's very sympathetic to him, has bent over backwards to support him even in questionable cases. This temporary pause on third world immigration that lasts forever is way beyond his powers, and I don't think the Supreme Court would allow that. But it is certainly possible that some narrowing of immigration law and rights will happen, and that the court might sustain that.
Right. Finally, let me just ask you about the Afghan immigrants who are desperate to get into America. We're talking about people who helped the US military forces during the 20-year war. Around 185,000 of them are right now in the pipeline for special immigrant visas to enter America. Does the US government have any sort of legal responsibility towards them to ensure that these people come? Or is this responsibility only moral? I mean, we can all agree that the US should welcome these people, but is there anything in the US law that compels President Trump or his government to get these people into America?
There probably is not. I think there's a strong belief by members of both his party and the Democrats that these people absolutely ought to come here, and that by not welcoming these people that we are endangering our own soldiers in future combat, because people aren't going to want to take chances to help us in other countries. That may end up forcing his hand. It's possible that Congress will pass legislation that forces some of these people in. But for the moment, that's only a moral responsibility.
Right. I think it's safe to say that what happened on Tuesday was horrible, and people are still grieving over what happened. Nonetheless, what has happened after that has been nothing short of weaponization of a horrible tragedy and targeting of an entire ethnicity, entire so-called third world group for what one man committed. We hope that common sense prevails in Washington. In the meantime, thank you so much, Professor David, for speaking to us on First Post.
Thank you very much.
I wore the crown of a revolutionary. I promised to lift my nation. I claimed to fight imperialism. I became the very thing I warned against. I funded militias across continents. I feared my own shadow. Some called me the King of Kings. History calls me something else. The dictator. Who am I?